Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Anna Karras and I am a Public Services Librarian for the Collier County Public Library System. And I'm here to take you on a 5-week armchair art historian course called Artitude. And today we are going to be discussing the first artist in our list, which is Gustav Klimt, the Austrian painter. Gustav Klimt was born July 14, 1862 and died February 6, 1918, so he never actually saw the end of World War I, and he was just 55 years old when he passed. The picture on the left you can see of him in his later years. The picture on the right is the portrait of a lady circa 1916 to 1917, and this was done in one of the last years of his life. His early life was typical lower middle class. He was born in 1862 in Baumgarten, which is just outside of Vienna. He was the second of 7 children. He was very close with his younger brother Ernst, who was 2 years younger than he was, and Ernst was also an artist, but he died at just 28 years old. His father was from Bohemia and was an engraver of gold and silver, and even though he had a trade with 7 children, they lived in relative poverty and as immigrants. Also, before I discuss his education, his mother, Anna Finster Klimt, was an unrealized musical performer. She had ambitions to be a musician, a singer, and they never came to pass. And I believe she was a very frustrated woman because of that. Klimt studied in the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. He studied architecture, fresco, mosaics, and painting. And let's take a look at some of the influences that he had as a young man, some of the things that he studied in school. The first was a German artist named Hans Markart. He was Austrian, and he lived from 1840 to 1884, so they overlapped a little bit. Hans Markart, you can see the picture here, was the acknowledged leader of the artistic movement in Vienna in the 1870s. So he was famous everywhere you looked in Vienna while Klimt was in school. Hans Markart was in your face. He was called the magician of colors, and he loved to use brilliant colors and fluid forms. And he used asphalt, actually, interestingly enough, to heighten the strength of his colors. So he would mix asphalt with his paint, which then in turn led to the deterioration of his works, unfortunately. Although he tried to use it to give more texture and more height and dimension to his paintings, but ultimately it did not work out. Klimt admired his dramatic use of light, his colors, and his exploration of the subconscious mind. And you can see here we have a goddess, and you can see the bold lines and the use of color, the blues and the gold, and we'll see all that coming back in a little bit. The second influencer of Klimt as a young man was Diego Velazquez. Now he was quite a bit before the time of Klimt. He was a Spanish court painter from 1599 to 1660, and many of his portraits hung in the Kunsthistorische Museum in Vienna, and Klimt would often be sent as a student to go into this museum and copy paintings and draw and study the great masters, and Velazquez was a favorite of his. The reason why you can see in the painterly brush strokes and the lush fabrics, and also the use of gold that you can see here in the picture. And also look at those rosy cheeks. That's something you're going to see a lot of in Klimt's paintings. So we'll come back to that again as well. The third influence was Titian. Even older than Velazquez, he was a Venetian painter from the 16th century. And again, many of his portraits hung in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. That basically means art history museum. And this is Isabella d'Este, the painting shown here by Titian. And also you can see the lavish details, the use of texture and fabric, and the beautiful complexion of the Titian. This is Emilie Fleurge. This is another early work of Klimt's. His elder brother Ernst married Emilie's sister Helena, and so they were a quartet quite often. Emilie was one of one of Klimt's greatest friends, and possibly his lover, although that was never proven. But they were inseparable for a very long time. She was a fashion designer and an artist in her own right, and she created many costumes for Klimt's paintings over the years. Klimt and Fleurge were best of friends, like I said, although there were rumors they were also lovers, and we'll talk about that when we get to the painting The Kiss. And in his early style of painting here, you can see there are hints at the painterly style. There is sort of a softness to her hair and her clothing, even though the face is very linearly rendered, meaning that it's done very much like a photograph. There is sort of a haziness and a softness to parts of this painting, such as the suggestion of the clothing and the way the hair is kind of soft and hazy. Vienna Secession years. Now, this goes between 1897 to 1905. In 1892, both his father and his brother Ernst died. And when they died, in the same year, Klimt's work changed dramatically from a formal style that we just saw in the portrait of Emilie Fleurge to a more free-form style that we know Klimt for today. In 1897, Klimt and a group of artists formed the Vienna Secession, which rejected the formal tenets of what art should be. Up until this point, there were very strict guidelines that people adhered to in the Academy of Arts. You could only paint certain subjects. They had to be done in a specific way. There were tenets and archetypes that you needed to follow. But these Vienna secessionists railed against the establishment and favored the style of Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau is defined as a style of decorative art, architecture, and design prominent in Western Europe and the US from the late 1890s until World War I, and is characterized by intricate linear designs and flowing curves based on natural forms. Klimt at this time also explored symbolic nature of mythical and allegorical figures. Their figurehead, the secessionists, was Athena, the goddess of arts and just causes, which we will talk about in the next slide. Moving on. Here is Pallas Athena, circa 1898. Pallas Athena was the guardian of the secessionist movement, and here you can see she is a rather androgynous figure. She has a rather thin arm, but a rather heavy jaw. No breasts are visible. It's hard to tell whether this is a man or a woman, and the lines are very soft, very blurred. The figures of Medusa and Nike further explore the feminine. Medusa was a gorgon who was a monster. She was the woman who became the figure with the snakes for her hair that turned everyone who looked upon her to stone. And then there was Nike, the form of victory that always, in Greek mythology, came to the victor of a battle or a war. And here we also see Klimt moving from a figural to an abstraction, whereas using the pattern, the scales of the breastplate, the use of gold, and the sensuality. We see the figure of Nike being the nude form of a woman, and she is very sensual with her hair and her arms outspread. But here comes scandal. Scandal! In 1894, Klimt was commissioned by the University of Vienna to create 3 large-scale murals for their Great Hall. The subjects were philosophy, jurisprudence, and medicine. His first work, Philosophy, was exhibited as a painting at the World Exhibition in Paris in 1900, where it received a gold medal. However, the University of Vienna and the Austrian public were outraged and scandalized because they found the work to be pornographic. The work was destroyed by fire at the end of World War II in 1945, and all we have here of it on the right is a photograph in a black and white. In 1901, a public prosecutor was called in for charges of obscenity. No action was ultimately taken, and Klimt had to give back his commission money in return for the paintings. This was the end of Klimt taking government commissions, and you will see he formally breaks away from all establishment and goes his own way in a very bohemian lifestyle. The Golden Phase. Klimt, who did not like to travel, did visit the city of Ravenna in Italy, which is filled with priceless Byzantine mosaics. You can see on the right here, this is the Empress Theodora, circa 6th century AD. And this is a brilliant mosaic. I've actually seen it in person. It is absolutely stunning. And it is very indicative of the influence that we see in Klimt's paintings at this time. Three of the most critical works of his period were the portrait of Adele Blockbauer, Danae from 1907, and The Kiss from 1908. The phase is marked by stylized patterns, flattened blocks of color, and gold leaf. And if you see gold in the paintings, it is real gold leaf. He achieves critical and financial success, and he lived a bohemian lifestyle. He never married, but he fathered at least 14 children. He had a lot of ladies who posed for him and became his lovers, and therefore it was just the way he chose to live his life. Now, the portrait of Adele Blockbauer, which you see here, was done in 1906. It was commissioned by Blockbauer's husband, who was a Jewish businessman, and it was stolen by the Nazis in 1941 when they took over Austria. It was displayed in the Österreichische Gallery Belvedere until 2006. And it was finally returned to the family, who sold it at auction for $135 million. It's now in the Neue Gallery in New York, where it remains on display indefinitely. There were rumors that Klimt and Blockbauer had an affair, and there certainly is a feeling of sensuality to this painting. Her head and arms are painted in oils to give it a softness and a sensuality that is in juxtaposition to the flattened blocks of color and pattern that make up her gown. And also, this way of painting her head and arms in a different way removes her from an earthly plane and makes her ethereal and sensual. The initial reception was negative, but he was paid handsomely and received other expensive commissions. He painted Blockbauer several times, although one critic did call it an idol in a golden shrine. And here we have Danae, painted in 1907. She was a popular subject in the early 1900s. She was a symbol of transcendence and divine love. And she's actually a Greek mythological story. Danae is visited by Zeus, who falls in love with her. He visits her as a shower of gold, which leads to her impregnation and the birth of her son Perseus. And nearly a quarter of the picture is taken up with her legs, which is combined with the closed eyes and open mouth, makes it a very erotic depiction. And I'm sure all of you have at least seen this once in your life. It's called The Kiss, and it was painted in 1908. It was possibly depicting the artist, Klimt himself, and Emily Fleurge. And it's got the masculine in it with the blocks of black and gray versus the feminine, which is the swirls of color in her robes. So you can see the difference there. On his robes, we have rectangles of color, and on hers, we have, rectangles of black and white, and on hers, we see swirls of bright color. And for 1900s audiences, this was considered pornographic. Even so, it sold before it was finished to the Belvedere for roughly $240,000 in U.S. currency, the equivalent of what U.S. currency would be today. It's a very big work as well. It's 6 foot by 6 foot. And then we have later works. This one is called Life and Death, which was done in 1910. It depicts the allegorical figure of death on the left. And then on the right, we have generations of life represented as a circle of life. So you can see the heads kind of make a swirl. It won first prize at the 1911 International Art Exhibition in Rome. And he worked on it for a very long time. He made changes as late as 1915. The death of his mother in that year may have been an influence. According to my notes, the background was changed from a brilliant gold to a gray-green. Perhaps we think that this might be the influence of his mother's death that encouraged him to do so. Klimt himself died in 1918 of influenza, and how appropriate to be talking to you from our own pandemic. Here is Klimt. He loved cats. He always wore a smock like that while he was painting. And he never kept a diary. Most of what we found about him were in letters. He found himself, honestly, to be a very uninteresting person. He once wrote in a postcard to Emily Fleurge, "There's nothing special about me. I am a painter who paints day after day from morning to night. Whoever wants to know something about me ought to look carefully at my pictures." I hope you have enjoyed the presentation today about Gustav Klimt. I hope you have enjoyed learning and seeing some of his works and learning a little bit more about him as an artist and a man. Tune in next week, where I will be bringing you a very different artist, MC Escher. So thank you for watching. Stay safe, wash your hands, and I'll see you on the other side. Bye-bye.